to go crazy right now. You ready? Yeah. Hey. Look, I just flipped a switch.
Here's what you want to know. Here's the good stuff. Nixon's the one that was responsible for taking us off the gold standard in 1971. I was able to obtain his personal daily diary for his secret trip to Camp David. And the discussions began on August 13th, which was a Friday. So we can see down here at about 2:31, they boarded a helicopter and they flew from the White House to Camp David, Maryland. And it was here that they had the secret discussions with Arthur Burns, chairman of the Federal Reserve, Paul Volcker, Secretary of the Treasury, Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Schultz. And this is where they devised the plan to go off of the gold standard. And why did they do that? Because they couldn't repay the loan from the Chinese elders. Because you need to get it in your spirit. But he's helped keep all of this focused. All right, XRP Collective. This is Dave, XRPLion, and we are bringing you information that you probably have no idea existed, let alone what happened and what's happening now. I pressed into the Lord and it was just like, okay, we need to know about this, because everybody that is oblivious to what's going on with Nassar, Jassara, XRP buyback, they don't understand how this has already been paid for. This has been paid for since before time began. When God entered into that contract with the devil and gave him permission to steal, kill, and destroy for 7,885 years, he knew exactly how much he was going to take, what it was going to cost, because in his word, it says that once the thief is known or caught, he has to repay sevenfold. And we all know what sevenfold is. It's not 7 times. But who's responsible? Putting together all this money that God laid up. That's what you're going to find out today. Do you know who's already paid for Nassara? Some of you do, but 99% of you do not. And that's what you're going to find out today. This group of individuals, families, they were destined by holy decree to have money ready for Nassara, the XRP buyback, and Jassara thousands of years ago. And there's even a really cool twist, but it all starts over here in the Philippines. So buckle up. I'm going to introduce you to the Chinese elders. They're a secret group called the White Dragon Society. And most often they're just referred to as the Chinese elders. But they had a mandate from God to store up wealth going back thousands and thousands of years. And as I've talked before, it was easy to do. Why? Because there wasn't shiny things to distract. There wasn't banks to steal it. And what was the most valuable commodity? It was gold. It was silver. It was precious metals. It was gemstones. And they put it away in caves and other places that they could keep safe. And again, they did this for thousands and thousands of years. It was just growing it, loaning it, and storing that wealth. Very much like what you've discovered if you've been following my videos with regards to what was confiscated or taken away from the Vatican with regards to Executive Order 13848, which, by the way, Biden just extended it for another year. It was set to expire on September 12th, 2023. Now, why would he do that? It's because the white hats in the military are in control, if you don't know that. They're directing his actions and making sure that everything is being done so that they can achieve their objective. And they've done it. They've saved the children. They've rescued the kids. They've eliminated the cabal, the deep state, Khazarian mafia, Rothschilds, State Street, Vanguard, Schwab, BlackRock, the stock market. It's not going into the new economy. But this is what you want to know about the Chinese elders. And I talked a little bit about it in the last video. The Chinese elders were made up of different multi-generational Chinese families that live in the Philippines. And they've been there for centuries. And they've owned and are responsible for around 90% of the world's gold. Most people don't know that gold, the largest deposits of gold, are found in the Philippines. And why is that? Because they don't let that information out. If you were to look up where the Philippines falls with regards to gold coming out of the ground, gold in the ground, they're very comfortable staying in the number 2 position and not drawing a lot of attention. Matter of fact, there was a book that the Reserve Bank of the Philippines published, and I have a copy of it. I can't show you any of the pages, but the bank actually, when all of a sudden the Philippines got a lot of viewing with regards to gold, they went into the marketplace and bought every single copy back that they could get. Because it talked about the history of gold in the Philippines, talked about the Chinese elders. And they didn't want that information out there. But they were 5 Chinese, we'll call them majors, that were responsible for the global currency reset and the release of the RV, the revaluation of funds. The Iraqi dinar, the Vietnamese dong, the bolivar, Zim, etc. But what I want to do is I want to take you down a very narrow path so you can see who they are and what they set out to accomplish. And there's going to be a point in here where you're going to go, well, wait a minute, they don't look like they're good guys. Well, keep this in mind. God already had a plan, knowing that contract was going to expire December 21st, 2020. So for all these years, they were simply loaning money and assigning money that was already established for humanitarian purposes in the future, which is now. And they allowed these families that were responsible for growing this money to get greedy and try to take it away. So it was a very, very well laid out plan. And I talked about that in my last video. So in 1914, the Illuminati bloodline family signed a 99-year lease on the Chinese elders' gold and then proceeded to illegally launder all American taxpayers' funds through their privately owned Federal Reserve, IRS, banks, headquarters, and corporations through Washington, D.C., the City of London, and the Holy See in the Vatican. Those 3 places are not part of their country. They're separate. Washington, D.C. operates on its own. London operates on its own. The Vatican operated on its own. But they're all bankrupt now. So that's a great thing. But that system was phased out with the global currency reset by the alliance. And the alliance is the white hats and the military that are responsible for running our country right now and making sure that everything is safe, everything's going as planned, all leading into this global currency reset and the new quantum financial system with NESARA, XRP buyback, and JASARA. That's not the New World Order plan. So I want to get that right out there, right up front. So if we look at footnote number 1, July 4th, 1914 to July 4th, 2022 was that lease. On July 4th, 2022, the Federal Reserve's contract expired, along with their ability to print and create money or credit. They were reduced to a board. Basically, they're there for future compliance with regards to the consumption tax and collection. Footnote number 2, the elders' gold. And this was just staggering because, of course, I've been working on the gold, making sure we understand how much it is. Now, in my prior white papers, I've identified the fact that the gold that was seized and taken from 2 of the Vatican tunnels, one went to Jerusalem, one went to Switzerland, amassed to a total value at today's prices of $43 quintillion. It was something in the range of 1.975 quintillion ounces. That's a lot of gold. And with the gold that the Chinese elders have been building up all these years, and what's in the ground, has been said to have a value of 10 to the 3600 power. 10 to the 3600 power. That's 1 with 3600 zeros. I mean, your brain should be on overload because we've never even imagined that we could be talking about money worth that much that we didn't know about. But see, it was for a time right now. That's why it wasn't known. And I showed you what was discovered and what I used in the valuation committee in my white paper to establish the liquidity requirement to determine the value for the XRP at $1 million and 100 quadrillion in a revolving liquidity requirement so that there isn't any issues going all the way out to 2030. So I went and found a program online that actually lets you type in a number for the power and you can find out the name. That's how I found out this name at the bottom. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. Millinovan Nagant centillion. So I probably did a terrible job about that. But again, there are values that exist greater than 10 to the 45th power. In 1823, the Rothschilds took over all financial operations of the Catholic Church. The Bank of International Settlements, BIS, or the Central Bank of Central Banks, was founded in 1930 using Asian gold. So here you got the Chinese elders, and they're there to be the financiers of the world. And BIS steps up to be that authority to run everything. Now, the gold was lent to the Germans to fulfill their obligation under the Treaty of Versailles, which was signed at the end of World War I. Because remember, when you have war, you have debt. Lots of it. And you have to borrow to pay it off. Now, in return, the Asians were promised that the United Nations would be created as a world parliament with Asian ancient families, East and West, families of the dragons acting as background observers, called the White Dragons. So their purpose was for good. Now, after World War II, the Allies broke their promise. They only used it for the countries they controlled. And here we got the G7, right? So in retaliation, the Asians cut off any further access to the gold. So they were the provider of last resort with physical, tangible assets that could be valued. Now think about it. And I'm just thinking about this right now as I'm talking about it. We know that the price of gold has been suppressed. And they did that through the Bretton Woods Agreement. Tier 1 banks could not hold gold on their balance sheet, let alone earn interest. So it forced the banks to go out and have to buy treasuries or loan money using the Federal Reserve rate plus the prime rate. I went back and at the end of last year, December, it was exactly 88 years. And the monthly average, this isn't the annual, this is the monthly average, was 6.43% on average. So these banks and Federal Reserve were loaning money. So it was the Federal Reserve plus the prime rate at an average of 6.43% over 88 years per month. That average is over 72% a year. I mean, it's just ungodly. It's usury. So they basically became, money lenders. That's all they did. And you were going to pay if you wanted to borrow money. Because what did they do? Their job was to steal it and take it away from you. Bleed you dry. But isn't that interesting? Einstein said the greatest and the worst invention in history was compound interest. And it goes way, way, way back, even to the Babylonians. But this is how the Chinese elders grew the money that they were intended to have for now. For Nassar, Jassar, XRP buyback, the humanitarian money. So it was a blessing in one respect, right? But it was also a curse in another. But God is making good on all of that with what's being provided. And you saw the estimates that I put out for the Nassara portion, broken down into 3 groups. 24 to 44, 45 to 60, and 61 and over. Let's come back to Nixon. So for weeks prior to August 15th, Nixon met with Arthur Burns, chairman of the Federal Reserve. And it was at these meetings he learned the U.S. had squandered hundreds of billions of borrowed gold from the Chinese elders, and that they were going to be unable to repay the Chinese elders' loan when it was coming due in full. I mean, did Nixon not already have enough problems? But all of a sudden he finds out that the United States government can't repay its debt. Well, they couldn't do that because they couldn't create money. Our money had to be backed. A dollar had to be backed by $1 gold, $1 silver. So what followed on that Friday, on August 13th, was the culmination of a carefully crafted, orchestrated, and diabolical plan to leave gold-backed U.S. currency and create fiat fractionalized money, which allowed the U.S. Inc. We should all know that our government was hijacked, 1871, and it was turned into a corporation, which meant that it wasn't operating under the Constitution. And by doing this, they were to they were able to fractionalize our monetary system to where they turned around and repaid the Chinese elders at a rate of 1 penny per dollar of debt. 1 penny per dollar of debt. So the $1 bill, I learned from Captain Kyle, was the only real money in the system. And this can be seen when you look at the U.S. Treasury seal on the left-hand side and the words Treasurer of the United States, all one word. There's no spaces. And isn't that kind of weird? When I heard him say that the $1 bill was the only real money, I immediately I was with my friend BG and I said, "Hey, what do you got in your wallet? Pull some money out." So he had a 1 and a 5 and a 10 and a 20 and a 50 and a 100. So I start looking at the bills. And I said, "Wait a minute. 5 through 100, the word Treasurer of the United States has spaces, as you see right down here. It was good on the $2 bill. We just didn't have one. Treasurer of the United States. The spaces represented the fractionalization of our currency, or I should better say the Federal Reserve's notes. Now, $1 bill, the seal says U.S. Treasury. The seal on a Federal Reserve note for the 2, 5, 10, 20, 50, and 100 says Federal Reserve. That's why the $1 bill was the only real money. I was able to pull up and get a hold of Nixon's personal diary for August 13th through the 15th. And it shows what his itinerary was and what he did, and the fact that here's when he went to Camp David, and here's who went with him. Excuse me. And we can see the Secretary of the Treasury, economic advisors, Federal Reserve Chairman, Secretary of the Treasury, Haldeman, etc. So these were the ones that were advising Nixon on what to do. You know, mind you, he's coming out of the Vietnam War. Things are crazy. And where did they spend all the Chinese elders' money? On the war. Here was the 14th. Well, it's still at Camp David. Here's who was there. And then we go to the 15th. And we see who he met with. We see that here was his broadcast. Right here, between 9 and 9:22 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, he addressed a nationwide television audience to announce that they were leaving the gold standard. And it was at this moment the U.S. currency lost its gold backing until 2023. Our fiat money system is gone. It's been replaced with a gold-backed system, gold asset-backed system. Because the Chinese elders put up 1 quattrodecillion, which is 1 followed by 45 zeros, to cover the cost of Nasara, the buyback, and Jasara. Let's look at I call it the funny money. Excuse me for kind of bouncing around here. Here's the Federal Reserve System. Okay. Here's the U.S. Treasury seal. Oh, actually, that says Federal Reserve. Excuse me. Federal Reserve. Oh, we recognize this name. Rosie Rios. Treasurer of the United States. All one word. All one word. Treasurer, space, of, space, the space, United Space States. Federal Reserve. F-A-K-E, fake. They created a system of fake fractional denominations starting with the 2 through the 100. So you can determine the value of each bill by taking 1, which is the real money, and dividing it by the fractional money. So a $2 bill was equivalent to 50 cents, a 5, 25 cents, etc. $1 over 100 was 1 penny. And this is what they did. They used that fractionalized money to go out and acquire and pay off debt. So they would have paid the Chinese elders, let's just say they had borrowed 20 trillion. They would have paid it back at 200 billion. Cheap. They got off cheap. So the evil elite and cabal fiat financial system was controlled by the deep state, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and the Crown of England. And this corrupt system, it's been eradicated and it's not part of the new QFS. So when the U.S. went off of that gold standard in 1971, that's when Nixon and Kissinger orchestrated all of this. They convinced OPEC to only accept U.S. dollars in payment for oil. This is where we come up with the fiat term for the fiat petrodollar. And it's been removed through the alliance made in BRICS. Now, this slide was made some time ago, this information, but all 209 nations have signed on to BRICS, automatically having signed on to Nasara-Jasara. So you couldn't sign up for Nasara-Jasara without signing up for BRICS, because BRICS is what takes us out of the fiat currency system. We just haven't announced it here. So all currencies around the world are backed by gold, precious metals, oil, etc. So it's all burned to the ground. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, many others have been terminated and are bankrupt. But you hear about them in the news because they're still playing a role in taking out evil. Here's the $100 bill. Now, this was a very, very exciting analysis. And I'm just gonna hit the high points on this because you're gonna want to come back and just drill down on it. But what I want you to notice is this, and this is how the Lord pointed it out to me. This blue strip represents the old cabal system over here on the left, Federal Reserve, and we're moving into what we have now, our treasury system, which was founded back in 1769. Seven years before Declaration of Independence. So we go from the fiat system into what we have now. So this bill is identified in 2009. Rosie Rios created it. She's responsible for it. Here's her name over here. And this bill didn't go into circulation until 2013. So it was held for 6 years. Oh, excuse me. 4 years. But then it became a timeline. This was really cool. It was a map. It was a key. And it starts in 1955 over here on the left. We got the Federal Reserve seal. We got the fractionalized Treasury of the United States. Back in 1955, the U.S. fiat dollar was worth $1. It had $1 of buying power. That was also the same year that minimum wage was $1 per hour. Okay, so that's the old system. That's what was, and what's on the right is what is. And it started right here, July 24th, 2022. That's when the agreement was signed between the Chinese elders and the U.S. Treasury Department to receive that 10 to the 45th power in gold. So that was the Nasara XRP buyback, and it was the fuel for the restoration of the world. So we have the new gold asset-backed currency for 17 years. So by the time everything gets implemented and it's off the ground and it's running and it's working, we're into 2025, that first part of 2025. And the timeline's going from right here to the right. And even the width of the little blue strip has a date. I mean, this is blowing me away when I was doing the math on this. Now, of course, this is the timeline that played into XRP in determining its value, which was tied to liquidity for the world. And of course, look at the design, okay? There's Fibonacci, golden rule, golden ratios through all of this. But look at how it goes across here, and then it drops down. It literally drops down in the year 2042.2, which is right here, 17. And we know what 17 stands for. And then this is like a ladder going up in the golden rule and Fibonacci ratios. And it stops right there at 1776. But what this represents is gold-backed currency. We've got the gold filled inkwell with the bell. We've got the gold feather pen. We have the gold writing, which is the Constitution. And each one of these represents a mark in the timeline going from here all the way over to here. So the fiat dollar, it dropped from 1955 to 724 of 22. And then we get into 23. And with this gold-backed currency, which starts at the blue line right here, I'm probably going to have to write a whole book about this. We go right back up to a dollar buying power. And that is so important to know. And I'm going to tell you why. There's been this story going around that prices in our economy are going to go back to 1955. That's not true. Goods are not going to get cheaper. Labor isn't going to go get cheaper. We're going to have free energy. But we're not talking about the cost. We're talking about the buying power. Okay? We're going to have buying power now with this money coming from Nasara, from the buyback. And as I've pointed out, even on Mel's show, a $10 million house isn't going to be on the market for $1.6 million, and you're going to go in and scoop it up because you have more than enough money. No, it's not going to be 16 cents after we get this money. It's actually going to go above $1, and it's going to be probably $1 and 125%, 137.5% for a short period of time. And that's only because of supply chain issues. There'll be more than enough people that have the money to buy things, so they're going to be bought. And there's going to have to be manufacturers that can turn around and make more. So again, come back to this and take a look at it. But that's the key. We're not going back to 1955 prices. We're going back to having $1 worth of buying power now. Okay? Really simple. So with this abrupt change in the U.S. monetary policy, a $2 trillion loan would be repaid for $20 billion. The Federal Reserve had a free license to print and create credit with no oversight. And of course, what did they use as their messaging system to accomplish this? Swift. Swift was their creation to acknowledge money was moving through the wire, through the Fed system. So they could turn around and think of it this way. It's got to get from LA to Denver. So the truck takes off going east. And Denver already knows it's on the way. But there's no communication during the movement. It just kind of goes into the ether. Well, that truck driver could have pulled over and decided he was going to go shopping and go to the movie theater. But there's no way to know that with the Swift system. And that's why with XRP, or with the concept that Brad Garlinghouse talked about, money should move just like an email. Swift didn't move money. It just said it was coming. The Federal Reserve behind the scenes was charging fees and making interest to the right of the decimal point. So everything past the second digit to the right, they just shaved it off. Because there's a total of 9 digits. And you probably have noticed that with your digital assets. They got all these numbers. Well, that's because there's numbers out there. They just don't show it here. Crazy, huh? So we can see just how this has affected the fiat money in the system. How this enabled the cabal, the deep state Khazarian mafia, to acquire assets for pennies on the dollar. So here was the fiat money quantity, right? So we come down here in 1971 and we go off the gold standard, and all of a sudden money, the quantity of money starts increasing. And here we are in 2000, right after the big tech.com bubble. And then it just continues to grow and grow and grow. And what fueled this? Market crashes, wars. So what would happen? We had 9/11. We had the 2008 financial crash. We had the crash of 2010. We had the crash of 2020. The only reason why they did those is so they could turn around and pump more money in. So they pump money in when they wanted to buy low. And most people don't know that the Federal Reserve is a private corporation, or was. And it traded in the markets for its own benefit. And it created its own credit. And it had its own private trading firms. And it used some that were very well known. BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. And it did funny things. And I heard something just the other night, and I wish I had pulled that clip, but it talked about why the stock markets close. Stock market closes so they can control what price it opens at. That doesn't happen in the digital asset space, does it? It's just running all the time. And then, of course, they did that in the futures market so they could squeeze people out of positions by closing the market for 15 minutes. So it changed the requirements if you were going to hold those contracts over, which again was just diabolical. It was flat out thievery. So you can see it went exponential, which is wild. So here was the U.S. federal debt going back to, what was it, 1939 by president. You can see what happened. Nothing really happened. And this is why the economy didn't grow. I mean, we came out of world wars. We then began to have 2 working people in a family. women made a choice to work. Other women made a choice to start families first and then potentially work. And then we began to see the ability to work at home because of the internet and build businesses at home. So we had working moms, working dads, and we had this huge population explosion that happened right after 2000. Because as I pointed out the other day, that younger generation coming in, 1996, coming out of college, there was money flowing in the economy, and you can see it here. They weren't expecting all of these babies to be born between 2000 and 2009. But there were more babies born than all the other generations before. Now we know why God took care of that. Because he knew that they were going to be part of his new economy. But just look how the debt grew. Now, I wrote a white paper back in 1992 not 1992, 1996, based on that meeting that I went to in 1994 with former House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Dan Rostenkowski, who told me about the program, which we can look at today and say that was NESARA. And I used $27 million as the debt for the United States. I used the consumption tax, etc. And I was able to prove that the debt for the United States could be paid off in 3.5 years with no income tax. So even back then, it was certainly possible. That's why they've never worried about the debt. And here we are, we get into 2023, and the debt was at, they say 32.4 trillion. Well, at one point we were at 31.4 trillion, which I used the base 10 math and took 31.4 trillion and went back 17 years or 17 iterations, and I was able to nail whatever the debt was at those particular times in history. It was all based on pi. So it shows you how they use basic math to control everything. So on August 15th of 71, Nixon announced on TV 3 dramatic changes in our economic policy. He imposed a wage price freeze, which ended the Bretton Woods international monetary system. And he imposed a temporary surcharge tariff on all imports. That system was created towards the end of World War II and involved fixed exchange rates with the US dollar as the key currency. But also it played a dynamic role for gold linked to the dollar at $35 an ounce. And gold had stayed down for so long. But see, this was all because they could not put value into gold because they couldn't recognize it on their balance sheets, the bankers. So the system began to falter in the 60s because of the excess of dollars flowing out of the U.S. into foreign central banks. So all this money that the Federal Reserve was creating had to go into the system, and it did that through the Treasury by creating Treasury bonds, which they then made other countries purchase to give us faith in their currency, because they began to follow this model. So there was a run on gold in 1968, which stemmed by a patch on Bretton Woods, known as the two-tier gold system. And all of this ended unilaterally by Nixon. So after a brief attempt to create a modified fixed exchange rate system, the world just moved to flexible rates so they could do what they wanted. When the U.S. ran out of money under Nixon, the dollar was separated from the gold. This meant that all countries of the world had to buy $4. The countries of the world had to have a trade surplus with the United States, which led to a strong dollar. Then in 2008, the rest of the world stopped lending to the United States, which led to the Lehman shock, or the financial crash of 2008, which Ben Bernanke saved the world. 30 minutes before the world was to end financially, and the entire financial system of the world would have imploded, he was able to show them that they had to do whatever it took to prop up the monetary system around the world. I've heard numbers as high as $800 trillion had to be put into the system. But what followed was the U.S. promised to put a black communist in as president. This communism was created by the Vatican and the Freemasons who controlled the Vatican. And that's who came in and became a servant to their needs. Now, there's things that went on there. They're just too much to write about. But he convinced the Asians to hand over 700 tons of gold to the Federal Reserve. Supposedly it was going to happen under the leadership of Alan Greenspan. And then what they did with this is they used it and they multiplied it 1,000 times to grow it, or to make it have a value of $23 trillion. And that allowed the United States corporation to exist until 2020. And what happened at the end of 2020? The contract ran out. God stepped in and declared, this is my time, this is my age, and this is my land. And he took it back. So here's how we can take a look at the gold. 700 tons, there's 2,000 pounds to a ton. That became 1.4 million pounds. It was 22.4 million ounces, which was the equivalent of $1,026 per ounce. So here was the gold value. So they multiplied it by 1,000 times, and that's how they got to $23 trillion. Now, in God's plan, they continued with each new loan the Chinese elders made to commit the cabal and the elites that much more. Because they thought they were in charge, right? How many businesses grow too fast, take on too much debt, and go out of business because they did that? So now we come forward and we have BRICS. So BRICS was the alliance of the nations of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South America, formed in 2008, right after the so-called mortgage crisis. And why was there this mortgage crisis? Because there was so much money moving, and it was so easy to make money. They used it to create loans, and they would package these loans and sell them into the secondary market. So in reality, the crisis occurred when the cabal continued to print fiat dollars while bankrupt and unable to pay the interest on the gold borrowed from the Chinese elders who backed the US dollar. And you heard me talk about that. When they were under the assumption that the administration was going to change, they said, hey, we're not losing control now. We're in control. And they went all in and they over leveraged to the tune of about 600 to 1. Well, it only took Jerome Powell increasing interest rates 0.25% to take them out. And it's kind of like a situation where you don't pick your foot up off of the snake, the neck of the snake. You keep your foot there and you just keep applying pressure until you know it's dead, it's killed, it's no more. And that's what's happened with these interest rate increases. The Lord told me what was going to happen. And I posted it. I said, here's what's going to happen this quarter. Here's what's going to happen. Jerome Powell was telling everybody, oh, you know, we might raise interest rates in 2026. And then 3 weeks later, it was like, well, maybe we need to take a look at 2025. And another couple of weeks later, well, you know, we might have to do something in 2024. And then all of a sudden, we're in the beginning of 2022, and wham, 50 basis points. And it just takes off. And we put 3.5% interest as a penalty into the market. And it crushed them. Literally killed them. To where they had to start selling off all their assets. Well, under that under the 2018 executive order, 13848, they couldn't get the profits from their profits they were unwinding. The White Hats and military seized it. And I just came across something the other day that said that they seized $700 trillion from the Rothschilds, and they used it to pay off all the debt in the world of all the countries. So they were debt free. That's why they all signed up for Nasara. So on Thanksgiving Day here, 11/24/22 in Geneva, Switzerland, all 209 nations signed the BRICS-Nasara agreement. And that appears to have been announced at their last summit when they all came together on August 24th. So exactly 9 months later. And we know 9 signifies completion. So after the GCR, all countries' currencies will be paired 1-to-1. So whatever country has a currency, and whatever they call it, it's going to be equal to our currency here. So you can travel the world and $1's a dollar. I took a look at that, and I think it's going to be called the UNA. The UNA. It means one. It means together. It means the same. And maybe at some point in time, it turns into a actual global currency. But, you know, we're not looking to create a currency. We need to make sure there's liquidity. And I always used to say, the good or service attached to the dollar isn't what's important. It's whether that dollar's moving. It's changing hands. And that's what will take place on the QFS XRPL through XRP. See, XRP isn't a currency. It's a gatekeeper. It's the master key. It's what allows everything that's taking place globally to have the liquidity it needs without having to move physical assets. Because all those physical assets are already stored and they've already been commoditized or tokenized into a certificate and put on the blockchain. So every U.S. Treasury note, which is rainbow currency or bond, has the gold already stored up in Cheyenne Mountain. Now that gold's getting a premium increase for what it does. To the tune, I've calculated $625,000 per pound for gold, which will back 62.5% of the liquidity requirement for the quantum financial system with XRP. The other 37.5% will be made up with silver and platinum. Now, those values are pegged. $625,000 per pound. Done. It's not gonna change. It's not tradable. But there'll be commoditized gold, which is out there being purchased by people that are being told that it's a great investment. But once you own that, I've already calculated what that could potentially go up to over the years. But there's so much gold out there. You could fill tens of thousands of cargo containers to the brim. There's so much silver out there. It just hasn't come out of the ground. But you can see how they suppress the metals for what their plan was. But, I look at gold and silver. Yeah, it's gonna have a multiple. Silver will have the biggest multiple. But, silver isn't going to be, $200,000. It's probably going to back about 12.5% of that $1 million value per pound. Per pound. See, Ripple joined the Pound Foundation, not the Ounce Foundation. And there's more than enough to make it a pound. We don't talk about getting an ounce of flesh. We talk about getting a pound of flesh. That's what the Bible says. So let's stay with it biblically. So the deep state cabal, Rothschilds, owed that $23 trillion to the Asian cabal leaders. And they were in a panic because they didn't repay the debt by January 1st of this year. So their panic was seen as they liquidated all their properties and other assets. Well, the white hats in the military were right there to say, hey, thank you very much. We'll take that money. Thank you so much. Rothschilds are done. Everything that they were taking care of was clawed back. All of the divine law money. And I talked about that in the last video. Okay, here's our 700 tons of gold, et cetera, et cetera. And then I wanted you to see the gold chart as to how I got to the value for gold. Okay? And we come back up in here. Okay, the Rothschilds were not repaying their debts to the other elite forces and selling off their assets. And this caused this, cascade effect, like dominoes, One person can't pay, and then the next person can't pay to pay somebody else, etc. So when that money ran out in January of 2020, the West controlled by the Khazarian mafia responded. They were done. They also managed to get some funding for the U.S. corporation by promising to bring back Obama, with Biden acting as his figurehead. But the Chinese elders had enough of him. He had pulled off some shady stuff. He had been borrowing from all of the major tier 1 banks, hundreds of billions of dollars, to try to control his plan. And it imploded on him. And they cut him off. And you've heard me talk about $40 million loan that got held up because of a spacing error. And then eventually they found out that it was fraud and he was trying to take from humanitarian money, the divine money, and they canceled it. So we are seeing historical events unfold before our eyes. And that's why I wanted you to all see and learn a little bit about the Chinese elders. They have done us a great service. Great service. And again, here's what I talked about with regards to the buying power being restored to the 1955 level. Here was $1 in 1955. And then in the beginning of 2023, it had a value of 16 cents down here. So its buying power just went, woo. You know, here was a house back then at $10,000. Here's a house at 16 cents to the dollar, and it's $500,000. That's the difference. So that loss of buying power meant that you had to spend $11.63 in comparison. And then, of course, here's the dollar in 1971. And when Nixon gave his speech, he said that it was being done to create a stable dollar with buying power. Well, the dollar had a buying power of 69 cents in 1971, and we can draw a line straight across and said, okay, well, that should have been the buying power. This is what it did right here. But through Nasara and the Restoration, we get back to our dollar buying power. I talked about this. On July 4th, 2012, the Federal Reserve was granted a 10-year extension to remain in its role of printing and creating credit. In May of 2020, the Federal Reserve lost its independence and was pulled in under the U.S. Treasury Department. On July 4th, 2022, the Federal Reserve got an extension. And they got an extension from from July 4th of 2012 for 10 years. That's when our currency system stopped. And it was shortly thereafter that all of a sudden, remember we started having the coin shortage? About August, September? And this is because the Federal Reserve could not provide money to the banks. So the banks had to try to figure out how to bring cash into the banking system. So what the Federal Reserve did is they went after the only commodity that the U.S. Treasury had, and that was coins. And that's why there was a coin shortage for a short period of time. So on July 1st, 2023, the Federal Reserve note was considered worthless and no longer legal tender. And they're saying by November of this year, November 1st, it won't be accepted anywhere. It's not being accepted internationally anymore. So most recent developments had both the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury miss their August 1st deadline to pay off the $23 trillion. And because of that, they were forced to forfeit all their assets. And they've been turning over their assets to the white hats in the Federal Reserve, in the military. On August 1st, the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury Department defaulted on over $14.3 quadrillion of additional loans that had been taken out using all the land, all the real estate, all of us and our body parts, every single breathing person in the United States, so that they could get $14.3 quadrillion loan. And as you can see at the bottom, the Federal Reserve borrowed that money to build the dumb tunnels for child trafficking. Here's a copy of the actual note identifying the money. And again, here's where I talked about the fact that when it appeared that Trump had lost the election, Cabal, Deep State, and Kazarian Mafia went all in and over-leveraged their financial positions. This is where Obama tried to borrow the money. Actually, it wasn't million, it was trillion, and got caught. But somehow he was able to get a hold of $400 million of the humanitarian money, and that was routed through Afghanistan, and he had it sent to the president of Italy. And this was the payment used to buy access to the Vatican satellites to hack the state elections in real time. And of course, they watched all this happen. They have all of it. So, in summary, the Chinese elders, the White Dragons, they began loaning their gold in 1914 for two reasons. The first is obvious. As stewards of God's money, they were to grow it and care for it until God asked for it to be implemented for humanitarian purposes. And not so obvious, it was part of God's elaborate trap for the evil cabal, deep state, Kazarian Mafia. It was in the fall of 2021 that the Cabal Deep State Kazarian Mafia lost the accounts they had been given to grow for future humanitarian work. And the funds were reclaimed under divine law, causing their access to these funds to be stopped in a heartbeat. And I call it came in the middle, it came like a thief in the night. The parties that were responsible for that money, that owned it under divine law, went right to the World Bank and presented proof. And it was like 1 minute you had access to it, the next minute you didn't. And their empire came crashing down. And this just talks about the aggressive rise in interest rates. And that's why it's not going to stop until Nassar is announced. They're keeping their foot on the neck of the snake and then chopping its head off. The Cabal Deep State Kazarian Mafia did not uphold their promises. They stole the funds and continued to steal, kill, and destroy God's people. Then in Genesis 50:20 it says, "For what the devil or the enemy meant for evil, God used for good, bringing redemption and restoration in ways we cannot fathom." This is right out of God's word. Bringing redemption and restoration. Now, I'm not a Bible scholar, but when I looked this up, the Lord told me to look something up. I mean, I was flabbergasted when I found this because that's exactly what we're talking about. And then we have Romans 8:28, and it says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Who have been called according to his purpose. See, this tells us, are we about God's business going into this new economy? Or are we going to be about our agenda? Are we going to try to carry our agenda into his new economy and not be on his agenda with his money? No, that's not the plan. And he told me in the very beginning, he said, those that are not with me, they'll be broke and penniless in 3 to 5 years. So since December 21st of 5862 BCE, God waited 7,885 years for his contract with the devil to expire on December 21st, 2020. From that moment onward, his plan and purpose, which was created before time began, came to full fruition. And evil has been permanently eliminated completely once and for all. Now the Maya, under the guidance of Enoch, constructed a solar calendar timeline system to report, record, and store important historical events. So today, in this case, August 15th, 2023, is precisely 18,993 days, or 52 years. 2,713 weeks plus 3 days. 624 months. From August 15th, 1971, when Richard Nixon announced that he was taking us off the gold system. It's 52 solar years, called a calendar round, and it signifies the completion of a prior cycle. And these cycles carried so much importance that they identified a start and they identified a completion. And that's what he revealed when he took me back to the Mayan calendar and showed me what its intent was. The global monetary system has been renewed. It's brand new. It's his. It's not man's. And it's now 100% gold asset backed once again. And the U.S. Treasury Department is going to be making this announcement to the public at any time. And the timing of this is going to fit just like a glove. And we can look at this. I'm going to move through this quickly. This just talks about what the Chinese elders put up in gold. And here's my analysis for the cost breakdown for Nasara. 5.4875 quadrillion. The XRP buyback, if we use 2 billion XRP as true retail holders, at 1 million a coin, it's just 2 quadrillion. The U.S. taxpayer restitution. This is for the income taxes, interest, commercial loans, bonds, etc. And it's going to be applied to 28 to 60 plus. 12.4 quadrillion. So we total all this up, all this restoration. It's only 19.975 quadrillion. It's a drop in the bucket. A drop in the bucket. So this is like one with 16 zeros. And we're talking about the Chinese elders giving us one with 45 zeros. More than enough. More than enough. What's happening now? Federal Reserve meeting on interest rates. We're coming into a period called Teshuvah, which identifies 10 days of repentance, and it runs from September 15th to September 25th. We are in the last month of the Jewish calendar. And the 15th, after 6 p.m., starts Rosh Hashanah, and that's the Jewish New Year. That was in the other video. This takes us into Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. We're going back, as Trump said, we're going back to the Hebrew calendar. And the majority of this was already covered. But I added this last little item. Let's not forget about 9/11. 9/11 was to begin on September 11th, 2001. And Nasara was scheduled to be formally announced at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time by Alan Greenspan, exactly 22 years ago. And what does the number 22 represent? Balance and harmony. So you can see they have done us a fantastic deed by honoring God and doing exactly what He asked them to do. Here's some of the videos I've done covering everything from the new quantum system, the XRP buyback, what's happening with the white hats in the military, the emergency broadcasting system. What does the 2004 Nobel Peace Prize winner in physics have to say about symmetry and how I use that in the price discovery for XRP, where all I had to do was find out what the total liquidity need was. Here's my white paper, which was separate from the committee's white paper, more in depth. EBS, QFS. My interview on Charlie Ward's show, where he confirmed everything I had to say about the redemption centers and what is to take place. And lastly, what you need to know about the money that's available for the humanitarian project. Charlie said in his own words, expect $1 million. By filling out the paperwork, I spent over 90 hours putting together a template. It's all ready to go. You change one section. You come up with the name for your quantum trust. You put your personal identification information on there, contact information. You get it notarized. You put it into a clear presentation folder. And you bring 2 copies with you to the Redemption Center. They're not going to deny people submitting their plan, because we know every person has something in their heart that they would do if money wasn't an issue. And it's not about your outcome. It's about you having the ability to do it. So don't hesitate. I have this pinned on my Twitter page. Go download it. Watch the videos. Don't be afraid to spend an hour or even 2. I'm making available $1 million. And all you have to do is fill out the form. And it's 99% filled out. I've already done it with you. The form's already been approved for other projects. And here's more information about it. So with that, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your support. Thank you for loving on people. Keep doing it. It's so important for the Redemption Center. We don't want to have any resentment in our heart. And with that said, I just want to say again, thank you. I love you. And have a wonderful weekend.
One side to go crazy right now. You ready? Yeah. Hey.
Look, I just flipped the switch. I don't know nobody else is doing this. Body start to drop.
Hit the flow.
I didn't want to know me since I hit the top. This is rolling
So pay attention. Now let's talk about some books I recommend. Right now, the number one tool for the minions is about creating a fence. Okay? This is the only book that you can ever read to understand it. It's by John Bevere, The Bait of Satan. Get it now. Don't wait. Not reading this book right now could be enough to not get you through the Redemption Center because you're harboring offense in your heart. I had a friend that when I first revealed this revelation from the Lord, he called me up and said he had not realized that for his entire life he was carrying resentment for his dad. And this set him free. The Rhema Code. If you want the best non-religious book about getting rid of shame and regret and loneliness and despair and hate and that feeling of being unloved, this is the book you want to read. It's an easy read. It identifies your true identity in Christ and what that means. The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles. He wrote this in a secular way in the early 1900s when everything was happening. And what this book helps you do, it helps you understand how to think, say, hear, and speak. Because you're going to come to understand that once you begin to think a certain way, heaven opens. And that's what happened for me. This is when I came to understand this isn't being taught. There's no pastors teaching about this. I've been teaching everybody that I know about it. Because then what happens? It's that manifestation that happens immediately. It's like what I need right now. I just praise and thank the Lord that He's already provided it. And there it is. Why? Because I do it every day. I'll be working on something with him and I'm like, Dad, what's the number? And he gives it to me. I don't have to wait a week. Book number 1, get this. Order this tomorrow, tonight. Get this one read and digested and fully understood. You can buy these 2 books and hold on to them for once you get this done and you're in that period of REST. Get yourself free and then understand how to think and speak. It's bringing us into our close. And I want to thank you once again. I want to thank my dear friend. His initials are BG. He has been an invaluable help in helping me organize all this information and bringing me up to speed on all the other information. I mean, you can go and watch my other videos.